Hi, my name is Andre Koen. I want to say welcome to this discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that there are a number of ways in which people are trying their best to interact with the world. We know that people are adapting their behaviors, their conversations, even how they think to the context around them. We know that people are doing the best they can with what they have to engage with the world. And oftentimes we find that that is still not enough. For an example, our parents did the best they could to raise us with what they knew. However, they could not, for many of us, taught us about sexting, right? So using the text to have a relationship, right? So they couldn't have taught us that. So they did the best they could. As we engage in these conversations about diversity and equity and inclusion, I don't want folks to get caught up in this concept of blame, shame, fault, and guilt. We know that those methodologies or those sets of behaviors that are either prescribed upon people, placed upon them, or bubble up as people try to engage in conversations about diversity aren't helpful. We know that fear, fault, blame, shame, these are not motivating factors that actually increase people's ability to be effective. They diminish people's ability to be effective. And so what do we want? We really want people to focus on what they have in their circle of control, right? So the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the major tenets is this idea of recognizing what is in your circle of control, maintaining, controlling, manipulating, participating in the things that you have control over, and recognizing those things that are outside of your circle of influence, the things you don't have control over. So I did not elect or choose or vote or pass a test to be born in this physical body. I didn't make a choice to be born to my parents or in the particular country that I was raised. And so I'm constantly learning how to operate, deal with, manage, understand what it means to be me in this specific context. I would certainly be a different person if I was born in a different part of the world, if I was born to different parents, if I had been born in a different economic or social class. I certainly would be a different person. And so what I'd like for us to recognize is, again, we're all doing the best that we can given our current context. And so what I'd like to see is, as opposed to guilt, fault, blame, and shame, is this idea that we are being compassionate to one another. That even if I don't understand why people do what they do, I should understand that they're after very similar things. And as human beings, we're all after safety, significance, and belonging. How we get to those things may, in fact, be very different, but we're all searching or reaching for similar things. So in the Office of ODI, we're working on rolling out some training opportunities that we hope you'll take advantage of. One of which is a training called Tolerance is Not Enough. And not to give away the punchline or circumvent our conversation, I do want you to think about what that word tolerance means. And for most of us, we recognize that tolerance means to put up with. Until when? Until we no longer have to. I'm sure you've had a house guest that may have stayed a little too long, but you could tolerate them because you knew at some point it would end, right? So tolerance is not enough. And so when we talk about this idea of tolerance, is it possible that there could be something beyond tolerance that we could be working towards? Is there something beyond just tolerating that house guest that compels you to tolerate them? Right? So we'll talk about that. So tolerance is not enough. That's roughly about a 45-minute to a 2-hour session. So it depends on how you want to use it, but we have that session coming soon. We also have the session that's based on the climate survey that was done, I think it was in 2015. The climate survey that helps us understand kind of where Mayo is in looking at diversity and inclusion. And so we have a tool called that we'll be rolling out that is based on the climate survey that was done here at Mayo. And one of the things that we found in that climate assessment was that people were very concerned about their own unconscious bias. And so this particular learning session is a brain-based approach supported with research and data to help us understand our own unconscious bias. Right, so we know what a conscious bias is. It's that way of interacting that is very prevalent. Like, you know, we have resistance to working with or seeing or operating with difference. This is the unconscious way in which we not only gain these biases, but how those biases are acted out and how we can take cognitive control over those unconscious bias. So look for that session coming out soon. And then lastly is this idea of stereotype threat. And stereotype threat is simply that there are stereotypes in our groups, and we can be stimulated to either fall into or be reminded of those stereotypes. And that can impact our performance. I think it's very similar, or a methodology that I use to think about this idea of stereotype threat is looking at professional athletes. Now, I will tell you that anytime we use a metaphor, there are some limits to that metaphor, so you can only carry it so far. But oftentimes, what we recognize about athletes is that they have done their craft repetitively. They could, for many of them, could do it in their sleep without any thought to it. But every so often, there are environmental factors that come into play into their psyche that actually limits them based on the triggers that are happening in that environment. And so when we talk about this idea of stereotype threat, I want us to think again about this opportunity to think about stereotype threat. As we think about stereotype threat, what is going on? So one way to think about stereotype threat is to look at a metaphor, right? So the metaphor I like to use is one of sports. We know that athletes go through their practice, their craft, probably hundreds or thousands of times in practice, rehearsals, and in games. But there are also these systemic things that happen that trigger some self-doubt, some worry, some concern that they have, and it causes them to not perform at their best. We refer to that as choking, right? So big games, high stakes performance, oftentimes there's a mental construct that is challenged that folks don't do well in because of that mental challenge. I'll come back to that later.